The rain-soaked alley was still echoing with footsteps when the K9 vanished. Moments earlier, the German Shepherd had been sprinting ahead, teeth bared, eyes locked on the fleeing suspect. Then, gunfire, shouting, a sharp turn into the darkness of the docks, and when the officer caught up, the leash was empty. No body, no blood, just silence where his partner had been. For 3 years, that K9 had never failed him, never hesitated, never disappeared. But now, every report said the same thing. Dog presumed lost. Case closed. Weeks later, under flickering warehouse lights miles away, a different crowd gathered. No badges, no uniforms, just buyers with folded arms and cold eyes. Metal cages lined the floor. Inside one of them sat a German Shepherd, mud still caked in his fur, a scar fresh along his shoulder. His police tag was gone, his name erased. Buyers circled slowly. Some wanted a weapon, some wanted profit. No one asked where he came from. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl. He just stared at the doorway, because somewhere deep down, he still believed his handler would come. And when a familiar scent finally cut through the stale air of that auction hall, everything changed. The officer stopped walking, his hands clenched, his breath caught. And before the auctioneer could raise the gavel, the officer stepped forward and said the words no one expected to hear. Stop. What happens next would expose a crime no one wanted uncovered, and prove that loyalty doesn't end when the badge comes off. Stay with us. This story will change the way you see K9s forever. Savannah, Georgia, after midnight. The rain fell hard and steady, turning the streets into mirrors of broken light. Old brick buildings wept rust down their sides, and the harbor wind carried the smell of salt, oil, and something older, decay that never truly left a port city. Street lamps flickered as if unsure whether they still belonged in the present. It was the kind of night that swallowed sound. Officer Daniel Mercer had learned to respect nights like this. Daniel was 36, tall and lean, built not from muscle alone but from endurance. Long shifts, missed meals, years of letting adrenaline replace sleep. His dark hair was cropped short, regulation neat, but the stubble along his jaw betrayed exhaustion he no longer bothered to hide. A faint scar cut through his right eyebrow, a souvenir from his first year on patrol, when he still believed every situation could be controlled if you followed the rules closely enough. His eyes were the thing people noticed most, gray, alert, always scanning. Not paranoid, just prepared. Beside him moved Kaiser, a 4-year-old male German Shepherd K9. Kaiser was all controlled power, a broad chest, long, muscular legs built for sprinting, and a thick black and tan coat, darkened by rain until he looked almost carved from shadow. His ears stood tall and precise, swiveling at every sound, every shift in the wind. His amber eyes were sharp but calm, trained not just to chase, but to decide. He was young for a K9, still in his prime, but there was nothing reckless about him. Kaiser worked with discipline, fast when needed, patient when it mattered. Daniel trusted Kaiser more than he trusted most people. They had been partners for 2 years. 2 years of night shifts, traffic stops, narcotics searches, and quiet moments sitting in the cruiser while rain like this drummed against the roof. Kaiser had learned Daniel's breathing patterns, the tension in his shoulders before danger appeared. Daniel, in turn, could read Kaiser's body like language. Every tail shift, every ear twitch, every pause before motion. That trust was why Daniel reacted instantly when the radio crackled. Unit 12, armed robbery in progress. Suspect fleeing on foot toward Riverfront Industrial Zone. Daniel's jaw tightened. Copy, he said. K9 unit responding. The cruiser barely slowed before Daniel was out, rain soaking his uniform as Kaiser leapt beside him, landing clean and silent on the pavement. Ahead, a figure ran, male, hooded, stumbling once before correcting himself, clutching something heavy against his chest. Track, Daniel commanded. Kaiser surged forward. The world narrowed to motion and sound. Boots splashing through puddles, breath ripping from lungs. Kaiser's nails clicking briefly on asphalt before the surface changed. Gravel, mud, rusted metal plates. They crossed into the old port. The Savannah docks had once been alive. Cargo ships, shouting crews, cranes groaning under weight. Now it was a skeleton. Shipping containers stacked like tombstones. Warehouses boarded up. Windows shattered and dark. The rain turned the ground slick, mud sucking at boots. The suspect darted between containers. A gunshot cracked the air. Kaiser didn't flinch. Daniel felt the familiar spike of fear, sharp, controlled, buried beneath training. He veered right, circling wide, trusting Kaiser to stay on the scent. That was how they worked. 2 paths, 1 mind. Another shot. Closer this time. "Kaiser!" Daniel shouted, not as a command, just instinct. The dog disappeared between containers, a blur of muscle and purpose. Daniel ran hard, lungs burning, rain blinding him as he rounded the far end of the container row. And then, nothing. No barking, no movement, no sound except rain striking metal. "Kaiser?" Daniel called. He swept his flashlight across the mud. No paw prints, no footprints. The rain was erasing everything as fast as it appeared. His radio crackled violently. "Unit 12, status." Daniel turned in a slow circle. A leash lay in the mud, cut clean through. "Kaiser's gone," he said, voice steady but wrong. "Repeat, I've lost visual on my K9. Silence answered him before the dispatcher spoke again. "Say again?" Daniel knelt, fingers sinking into cold mud, searching for anything. Blood, fabric, fur. There was nothing. No sign of struggle. No shell casings near enough to explain it. Just absence. Minutes later, backup arrived. Floodlights washed the docks in harsh white, revealing nothing but rain and rust. Officers spread out, calling Kaiser's name, their voices swallowed by the storm. No response. A homeless man stood near the far fence line, half hidden beneath a torn tarp. He was older, late 50s maybe, thin to the point of fragility, beard tangled and gray. His clothes were soaked through, hanging off him like borrowed fabric. His eyes, though, were sharp, clearer than most people expected. Daniel approached him slowly. "Did you see anything?" he asked. The man hesitated, rubbing his hands together. "Truck," he muttered. "White. No plates. Left real fast. Right after the bang." "Where?" Daniel pressed. The man pointed toward the service road that curved away from the docks, already swallowed by rain and darkness. Command didn't take the lead seriously. No cameras caught the truck. No witnesses could confirm it. The official report read, K9, possibly disoriented during pursuit. Suspected separation due to gunfire. Daniel stood under the awning outside headquarters hours later, soaked and shaking, listening as his supervisor spoke. Lieutenant Mark Reynolds was a thick-set man in his early 50s. His uniform pressed sharp, his face permanently tired. He was a by-the-book officer, not cruel, but cautious. Someone who survived his career by avoiding waves instead of making them. "These things happen," Reynolds said carefully. "Dogs get spooked. Weather didn't help." Daniel stared at him. "Kaiser doesn't spook," he said quietly. Reynolds sighed. "You're too close to this." That was the moment something shifted. Not loudly, not violently, just a fracture. Daniel filed the report, followed procedure, answered questions. But when he went home, the silence was unbearable. Kaiser's bowl sat untouched. His leash hung by the door. Daniel didn't sleep. By morning, the rain had washed the city clean and taken everything with it. 72 hours after the rain finally stopped, the search was officially closed. The decision came quietly, buried inside a routine morning briefing, spoken in the same tone used for scheduling traffic patrols and equipment checks. No ceremony, no pause, just a sentence that felt far too small for what it erased. After 72 hours with no confirmed sightings, the K9 unit is presumed separated during pursuit. Active search is terminated. Daniel Mercer stood near the back of the room when the words were spoken. He didn't react. He didn't argue. His face remained still, jaw tight, eyes forward, as if he were listening to something else entirely. Inside, though, something hardened. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. Something that refused to accept finality, simply because it had been declared. When the briefing ended, officers filtered out in clusters, voices low, boots echoing on tile. A few offered Daniel brief looks of sympathy, others avoided him altogether. No one said Kaiser's name. Lieutenant Reynolds stopped him at the door. "Go home," Reynolds said, not unkindly. "Get some rest. You're no good to anyone like this." Daniel nodded, because nodding was easier than explaining that rest had become impossible. At home, the house felt wrong. Daniel lived alone in a narrow 2-story townhouse near the edge of Savannah's historic district. Exposed brick walls, old wood floors that creaked no matter how carefully you stepped. Kaiser's presence had once filled the space, nails clicking on the stairs, weight settling at the foot of the bed. the quiet rhythm of shared breathing at night. Now the silence pressed in. Daniel lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun uselessly. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard it, a phantom sound, sharp and urgent. A bark, Kaiser's bark. Not aggressive, not playful, the one he used only when something was wrong. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams broke apart before they could settle. In one, Kaiser was running ahead of him through rain again. In another, Daniel stood outside a chain-link fence, watching his partner pace on the other side, unable to hear his voice no matter how loudly he shouted. By the third night, Daniel stopped trying to sleep at all. His sister noticed first. Emily Mercer was 32, shorter than Daniel, with the same gray eyes but softened by warmth he seemed to have misplaced. She worked as a high school art teacher, her hands often stained with charcoal or paint, her posture relaxed in a way that suggested she believed in things like patience and second chances. They had grown up closer after their father died, and she had learned to read Daniel's silences as fluently as others read words. She showed up unannounced, keys jangling as she let herself in. "You look like hell," she said gently, setting a bag of groceries on the counter. Daniel managed a faint smile. "You should see the other guy." Emily's gaze drifted to the untouched dog bowl near the door, to the leash still hanging where it always had. Her smile faded. "You haven't slept," she said. Daniel didn't answer. That night, after Emily left, Daniel returned to the docks, not officially, not logged. Just him, a flashlight, and the memory of where Kaiser had last disappeared. The mud had dried, cracked now underfoot. But something caught his attention near the far container row, a shallow scrape in the dirt, half hidden beneath tire marks. He knelt, heart pounding, and brushed debris aside. Metal glinted faintly in the beam of his light. It was the casing of Kaiser's GPS collar, not torn, not broken, removed. The realization hit him slowly, like pressure building behind the eyes. Someone hadn't found the collar after the fact. Someone had taken the time to unclip it, cleanly, deliberately. Daniel sat back on his heels, rain-soaked memories flooding in all at once. Kaiser hadn't run. He'd been taken. The next morning, Daniel called in sick. Instead of resting, he drove across town to a small veterinary clinic tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The sign above the door read Low Country Animal Care. It was not a place that advertised canine specialists, but Daniel knew the woman who worked there. Dr. Sarah Whitfield had been patching up police dogs long before she officially retired from contracted canine work. In her early 40s, she was tall and slender, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair usually pulled back into a practical bun. Her eyes were observant, guarded, not cold, but careful. Years earlier, she had lost a service dog during a training accident, the department quietly labeled unavoidable. Daniel had always suspected that loss had taught her to question official explanations. She frowned the moment she saw him. "You shouldn't be here," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "They'll see your cruiser." Daniel glanced back at his unmarked car. "I'm not here on duty." That made her frown deepen. They talked in her office, door closed, voices low. Daniel showed her the collar casing. Sarah turned it over slowly, her fingers precise. "This wasn't damaged," she said. "No tearing, no stress fractures." She looked up at him. "Someone knew what they were doing." Daniel swallowed. "Has anyone asked about canines lately?" Sarah hesitated, then sighed. "Off the record?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "I've had 2 calls in the last month," she said. "Private security types, not local, asking if I knew where they could acquire fully trained working dogs. Not retirees, not washouts. Active-level dogs." Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine. "They didn't want puppies," she continued. "They wanted experience, obedience under fire." "And you told them?" Daniel asked. Sarah's lips pressed thin. "I told them no." Word traveled fast in Savannah. Over the next few days, Daniel followed it quietly. Conversations overheard in parking lots, half-finished sentences in bars near the port, mentions of money changing hands, of assets moving through unofficial channels. The phrase came up more than once. Private auctions. Not the kind with signs or permits. The kind that happened in warehouses, behind locked doors, for people who preferred deniability over legality. Daniel started keeping notes. Times, names, routes. He didn't tell Reynolds, didn't tell anyone at the precinct. Officially, Kaiser no longer existed in the system. There was no report to update, no case to reopen. Unofficially, Daniel worked every hour he wasn't scheduled to be somewhere else. Emily noticed the change before anyone else did. "You're chasing ghosts," she told him one evening over takeout he barely touched. "This isn't healthy." Daniel met her eyes. "He's alive." She hesitated. "You don't know that." "I do," he said simply. Outside, Savannah moved on. Tourists filled the streets again. The docks returned to their quiet rhythm, but somewhere beneath that surface Daniel felt it, a current pulling him forward, refusing to let him stop. Kaiser wasn't lost, he had been erased, and Daniel was no longer willing to accept the version of the story that fit neatly into a report. Daniel Mercer did not report for duty that morning. Instead, he drove south, away from Savannah's historic streets and tourist traffic, following a narrow highway that slowly dissolved into marshland. Georgia's low country stretched wide and flat here, a deceptive landscape of tall grasses, shallow water, and twisted trees that looked dead even when they weren't. The air smelled of mud and rot, sweet and heavy, clinging to the inside of the car. This was where things were meant to disappear. Daniel wore plain clothes, faded jeans, work boots scuffed at the toes, a dark jacket that hid his posture and his training. Without the uniform, he looked like what he was pretending to be. A private contractor, mid-30s, alert but not curious, the kind of man who asked few questions and paid on time. He had practiced the role in the mirror the night before, lowering his shoulders, softening his gaze, burying the instinct to command. The address he was following hadn't come from any official source. It had come from whispers, from overheard conversations near the port, from a folded scrap of paper slid across a diner counter by a man who wouldn't meet his eyes. Coordinates instead of words. The road ended at a rusted gate. Beyond it lay a compound that barely deserved the name, a collection of low buildings half swallowed by reeds, chain-link fencing patched with mismatched metal, floodlights mounted high but left off in daylight. It could have passed for an abandoned agricultural site, if not for the cameras. Daniel parked where a faded sign read, "Private property, no trespassing," and waited. A guard approached, slow and deliberate. The man was tall and heavy-set, late 40s maybe, with a shaved head and sunburned skin stretched tight over muscle built for intimidation rather than speed. His eyes were small, assessing, used to deciding whether someone was a threat or an opportunity. "You lost?" the guard asked. Daniel shook his head once, looking to buy. The guard studied him longer this time, then jerked his head toward the gate. "You're early." "Didn't want to be late," Daniel replied evenly. That earned him a thin smile. Inside, the compound smelled worse than outside. Ammonia, wet fur, old food. The sounds reached him next. Low whining, claws scraping concrete, metal rattling softly. Not barking. These dogs had learned quickly that barking changed nothing. They were led into the main structure, a long building with barred windows high up the walls. The interior was lit by fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly, casting everything in a sickly white glow. Rows of kennels lined the space. Daniel forced himself not to react. Inside the cages were dogs, German shepherds, Belgian Malinois, a few mixes that still carried the posture of working animals. Their coats were dull, some marked by fresh scars. Their eyes tracked movement with trained precision, even as their bodies remained still. Each cage bore a metal plate, not names, numbers. K917, K923, K931. Chips had been removed, tattoos scrubbed, collars replaced with plain bands bearing nothing but stamped digits. This was not storage, it was erasure. A woman stepped into view near the center of the room. She was in her late 30s, average height, wiry rather than thin, with dark hair cut short enough to stay out of her face. She wore cargo pants and a faded volunteer vest, the kind handed out by animal charities. Her posture was relaxed, almost casual, but her eyes missed nothing. They flicked briefly to Daniel's hands, his boots, the way he stood. Her name, he would later learn, was Lena Ortiz. Lena spoke softly to one of the dogs, kneeling near the cage, her voice calm and steady. The dog inside, a Malinois, young, maybe 3, pressed its nose to the bars, tail giving one cautious wag. "You're good," she murmured. "Easy." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. Lena stood as he approached, offering a brief nod. "You here for the auction?" Daniel hesitated just long enough to seem human. "Depends what you've got." Her eyes searched his face, just for a moment too long. Then she smiled, polite but distant. "We've got what most people want. Trained, obedient, clean." Clean. The word landed wrong. As they walked, Daniel noticed the pattern. The dogs reacted to Lena differently than they did to others. Not fear, recognition. Trust, thin and fragile, but present. "You work here?" Daniel asked. She shrugged. "I help where I can." That answer was incomplete by design. They stopped near a clipboard hanging on a hook. Dates were marked in red. One circled number stood out. 48 hours. Daniel's pulse quickened. "Everything listed here goes fast," Lena said, as if reading his thoughts. "Private buyers don't like waiting." Daniel leaned closer to one cage. The dog inside was a German Shepherd. Male, large, black and tan coat dulled by grime. His ears were upright, alert, but his body was still, too still. His eyes met Daniel's, and held. Daniel nearly lost control. Kaiser's name was gone. In its place, a stamped tag read K9-29. The dog didn't bark, didn't whine, but his tail moved once, just once. Daniel straightened slowly, every instinct screaming to reach for the bars, to say his name, to break the lie wide open. He didn't. He couldn't. Not yet. "You seem interested," Lena said carefully. Daniel nodded. He looked solid. Lena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Later, outside, Lena found him alone near the fence line. "You're not like the others," she said quietly. Daniel didn't answer. She continued anyway. "The man you were chasing the night your dog vanished. He wasn't running from you." Daniel's head snapped toward her. "He was running you," she said. "Misdirection. They do it every time. Loud crimes, foot pursuits, something to pull canine units into bad terrain." Daniel felt cold spread through him. "The dogs are the real target," Lena added, "not the thieves." Daniel exhaled slowly. "How do you know this?" Lena looked out toward the kennels. "My dog was taken the same way," she said. "Explosives detection. 6 years old. They told me she washed out. 2 weeks later, I saw her photo on a private listing with a new name." Her voice didn't break. That was the worst part. She turned back to him. "The auction's in 2 days. After that, they disappear again. For good." Daniel nodded once. 48 hours. That was all the time he had. The warehouse sat at the far edge of the coastal district, its metal siding faded by years of sun and salt, its roof dented by storms that had blown through Savannah and left their scars behind. Seagulls circled overhead, crying into the dusk, and the wind that pushed in from the Atlantic carried a chill sharp enough to sink into bone. By night, the place looked abandoned. No signs, no workers, just a stretch of uneven pavement and a single flickering security lamp. But inside, the warehouse was far from empty. Rows of folding chairs faced a makeshift stage. Temporary floodlights, industrial, bright, merciless, hung overhead, spilling pale blue-white illumination across the space. The light flattened everything, draining warmth from faces, turning eyes reflective like glass. Beneath them, the cages stood in neat formation. Each dog inside held still, as though afraid to draw attention. Daniel Mercer slipped in just before the doors were sealed. He wore the same civilian clothes from the Marshland visit: jacket, jeans, boots. His posture relaxed enough to blend in, his expression unreadable. He kept his head down, but his eyes alert, cataloging every face in the room. The buyers were a mixed collection. Some were corporate security types, sharp suits, expensive watches, unbothered confidence. Others were rougher around the edges, private guards hired by people who refused to trust standard protection. A few looked like hunters out of place, thick jackets and restless eyes. They scanned the cages not like animal lovers, but like investors evaluating assets. A man stood out even among them. Tall, impeccably dressed, in a tailored charcoal suit that didn't belong anywhere near a warehouse. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly combed, and a gold signet ring glinted on his right hand. His name, Daniel would learn, was Victor Hale, a private defense contractor from Florida, known for building elite canine strike units for high-paying clients. He carried himself like someone who assumed ownership of whatever he touched, including living creatures. His voice was smooth when he spoke to the handler beside him. "I want the strongest one," Victor murmured. "The one with real fight left, not the docile ones." The handler, a young man in his 20s with acne scars and jittery eyes, nodded quickly. "We've got a few. High drive, zero hesitation." Victor's gaze swept the cages. Calculation, not compassion. Daniel's jaw clenched. Lena Ortiz was already inside. She wore a staff vest again, clipboard in hand, but her eyes flicked toward Daniel the moment she spotted him. Her expression didn't change, but her head tilted just slightly. A silent question. "Are you ready?" Daniel nodded. She drifted away, weaving between buyers, leaning in to speak quietly to dogs in cages. Her movements were practiced, natural. No one paid attention. That was her strength, being present without being seen. Behind the stage, Daniel noticed two guards, different from the marshland man, younger, more polished. Their uniforms were private security, dark tactical shirts, holsters strapped tight, radios clipped to their shoulders. One had the bearing of a former Marine, shoulders squared, jaw set like carved stone. The other was wirier, pale-eyed, constantly scanning. The Marine-looking guard was Mason Tully, late 30s, tall, muscled, a lifetime of discipline carved into every line of his frame. His expression was flat, professional, but his eyes betrayed calculation. Not cruel, but cold. A man who executed orders without asking why. The wiry one was Gavin Pike, mid-20s, thin but quick, fingers tapping in constant restless rhythms. His demeanor suggested someone who liked chaos a little too much, someone who hid his ambition behind humor that was sharper than it appeared. The auctioneer climbed onto the stage. He was heavy-set, bald, with a blazer stretched tight across his middle, one hand gripping a clipboard, the other adjusting his microphone. His name was never spoken, but his voice carried authority, too smooth, too practiced for someone working in a place that pretended to be anonymous. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you for attending. Tonight's selection includes dogs fully conditioned for advanced obedience, high-risk environments, and tactical response." He didn't mention where they came from. He didn't mention who they once belonged to. He didn't mention the lives they had saved. Daniel watched Kaiser's cage. The dog lay still, head low, tail unmoving. Too quiet, too obedient, too familiar in his silence. Kaiser had always gone still under stress, not frozen, but calculating, choosing when to act. Even with his identity stripped away, Daniel could read every muscle in the dog's posture, the tension in his shoulders, the controlled breathing, the way his ears twitched just slightly whenever footsteps approached. Kaiser wasn't broken. He was waiting. And when Kaiser's nose lifted, just barely, Daniel felt the breath leave his lungs. Kaiser wasn't reacting to movement. He had caught a scent. His scent. The moment hung suspended. Then Kaiser's head rose, slowly, sharply, eyes locking onto Daniel through the bars in a single, unmistakable moment of recognition. No sound, no bark, just knowing. Daniel swallowed hard, but his face remained neutral. He couldn't risk anything. The auctioneer clapped his hands sharply. "We'll begin with lot 12, he announced. But Victor Hale raised a hand lazily. "Skip ahead. I'm here for the shepherd in row 2, the strong one, the one labeled K9-29. Daniel felt every muscle in his body tighten. Kaiser. The handler hesitated. "Sir, he's scheduled for later." Victor didn't look at him. "Bring him out." The handler swallowed. "Yes, sir." As they unlocked Kaiser's cage, Lena drifted toward the far side of the warehouse, sliding her phone from her vest pocket. She typed quickly, her fingers hidden by the clipboard she held. Then she stepped behind a stack of crates and tapped send. Somewhere far from Savannah, a federal inbox received a burst of data. Names, dates, photos of cages, clipped ID chips. She reappeared seconds later, expression unchanged. Kaiser was led onto the stage. He did not resist, did not fight. He simply stood there, head lowered, rain-weathered coat dull in the cold light. To anyone else, he looked submissive, a dog conditioned to silence, a dog who had accepted defeat. But Daniel saw the truth. Kaiser's ears twitched again, twice. It was a signal only their team used, a silent alert, a request. "Are you here?" Daniel shifted his weight, just once. "Yes." Victor stepped closer, inspecting the dog like merchandise. Good build, strong chest, conditioned nerves, perfect. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Shall we begin bidding at—" Daniel stepped forward, not too fast, just enough to seem impatient, enough to seem like a man ready to outbid anyone in the room. Victor looked at him, irritated. "You're interested?" Daniel nodded. "In him." Victor smirked. "You won't get him." And for the first time, Daniel allowed a sliver of his true self into his voice. "We'll see." Around them, the room shifted. Lena exhaled. Kaiser lifted his head higher. The guards watched, unsure. And Daniel realized he had crossed the invisible line between staying under cover and stepping into danger. But it didn't matter. His partner was 10 feet away, and this was the moment the entire world narrowed to a single truth. If he followed the rules tonight, he would lose Kaiser forever. The moment Daniel Mercer reached for the chain, the illusion collapsed. Voices exploded across the warehouse, overlapping shouts ricocheting off concrete walls. Chairs scraped backward. Someone swore loudly. The auctioneer slammed his hand against the podium, barking orders that no one followed. Under the cold lights, discipline dissolved into panic. Daniel straightened and did the one thing he had avoided since stepping inside. "I'm a police officer," he said, voice carrying clean and sharp through the noise. "And that dog was stolen." The words landed like a dropped weapon. A few buyers froze. Others surged toward the exits. The handlers tightened their grips, knuckles whitening around chains. Victor Hale's face hardened, the practiced calm replaced by calculation. He took one step back, eyes flicking to the side doors, already measuring distance. Kaiser did not hesitate. The instant Daniel's voice cut through the chaos, Kaiser lunged. The chain snapped taut, metal biting into his collar. He drove forward anyway, teeth clamping down with trained precision. Not on flesh, on fiber. The restraint gave with a sharp crack, nylon fibers tearing under pressure. Kaiser hit the concrete and ran. He did not sprint wildly. He moved straight to Daniel, shoulder low, eyes locked, momentum controlled even in desperation. He crashed into Daniel's legs, weight and warmth and familiarity knocking the breath from his lungs. Daniel dropped to one knee instinctively, arms wrapping around Kaiser's neck as if his body remembered before his mind caught up. Handlers shouted. One grabbed for Kaiser's hindquarters and missed. Another raised a baton, then froze when Kaiser swung his head, teeth bared, not attacking, but warning. Years of conditioning flickered back into place, layered over loyalty that refused to be erased. Across the room, Lena Ortiz moved fast. She was smaller than most of the men around her, but speed had always been her advantage. She ducked beneath flailing arms, cut toward the kennel wall, and pulled a lever she had memorized days ago. Locks clicked open in sequence. Metal doors sprang wide. Dogs spilled forward. Some hesitated, blinking in the harsh light. Others surged out, bodies colliding, chains clattering to the floor. German shepherds, Malinois, a few older dogs with graying muzzles and stiff joints, moving slower but with the same instinct, to follow the man who stood between them and the threat. Sirens wailed outside. Not local patrols. Federal. The doors at the far end of the warehouse blew open as agents flooded in, weapons raised, voices commanding, coordinated and relentless. Jackets marked Federal cut through the confusion like a blade. Buyers dropped to the ground. Handlers raised their hands. Someone tried to run and was tackled hard against the concrete. Victor Hale bolted for the side exit. He moved fast for a man who relied on control rather than speed, coat flaring behind him as he sprinted toward a storage alcove. He knocked over a drum as he ran, liquid sloshing out, the sharp stench of accelerant filling the air. "Fire!" someone shouted. Hale struck a lighter, hands shaking now, the mask fully gone. He didn't get the chance. Lieutenant Mark Reynolds stepped into the alcove like he'd been there all along. Reynolds looked older than Daniel remembered under the harsh lights, lines etched deeper into his face, his expression stripped of bureaucracy. He moved without hesitation, tackling Hale shoulder first into a stack of crates. The lighter skidded across the floor and died. Agents piled on, wrenching Hale's arms behind his back as he screamed incoherently about contracts and ownership. Reynolds pushed himself up, breathing hard. His eyes met Daniel's across the warehouse. For a long second, neither spoke. Then Reynolds nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. It was acknowledgement. Around them, the warehouse transformed from auction house to crime scene. Evidence bags appeared, Phones were seized. Buyers were lined against the wall, hands zip-tied, faces pale under fluorescent glare. Lena stood near the open kennels, one hand pressed to her chest as dogs milled around her, unsure but no longer afraid. Daniel stayed where he was, one hand buried in Kaiser's fur, grounding himself in the reality of warmth and breath and heartbeat. Kaiser leaned into him, trembling now that the motion had stopped, ears flicking at every sound but body pressed tight, refusing distance. "You're okay," Daniel murmured, words meant for both of them. "You're safe." Kaiser exhaled, long and shaky, and licked Daniel's cheek once, brief, precise, almost embarrassed. Daniel laughed despite himself, the sound breaking through the tension like a crack in ice. A federal agent approached, tall and angular, her dark hair pulled back severe and efficient. She introduced herself quickly, voice clipped but not unkind, eyes scanning the scene even as she spoke. "We've been tracking this ring for months," she said. "We needed proof. Live proof." Her gaze lingered on the dogs, now sitting or standing in loose formation around Daniel, drawn to him as if by gravity. "You gave us that." Daniel nodded, too tired for anything else. Medical teams arrived next. A veterinarian with gray-streaked hair and steady hands moved among the dogs, assessing injuries, murmuring reassurances. She paused at Kaiser, noting the rawness around his collar, the stiffness in his gait. "He's strong," she said quietly, "but he's been through something." Daniel knew that already. As dawn crept toward the horizon, the cold lights inside the warehouse were finally shut off. Sunlight filtered in pale and tentative, revealing the space as it truly was, bare, ugly, stripped of its false order. Reynolds approached Daniel again, this time slower. "I was wrong," he said simply, "about all of it." Daniel studied him, searching for defensiveness, for excuses. He found none. "Get them home," Reynolds added, glancing at the dogs. "I'll handle the rest." Hale was led away in cuffs, shouting promises and threats that echoed uselessly against the morning air. The investigation would widen now. Contracts, shell companies, private security firms hiding behind legal language. But that was for later. For now, cages stood open. Chains lay broken on the floor, and Kaiser stood at Daniel's side, head high, eyes clear for the first time in weeks. They walked out together. Morning came softly this time. Savannah woke under a pale sky, the kind that followed a night of rain without carrying its weight. The streets were still damp, sidewalks darkened where water clung in shallow pools. The air smelled clean, salt and magnolia, a quiet promise that not every storm left damage behind. Daniel Mercer stood outside the K9 rehabilitation wing just after sunrise, coffee cooling in his hand. He looked different than he had weeks ago. Still lean, still worn by the job, but steadier now. The tension that once lived permanently in his shoulders had eased. Not gone, never gone, but no longer in control. Behind the glass doors, Kaiser moved slowly across padded flooring. He was the same dog and not the same at all. At 4 years old, Kaiser's body had healed quickly. The rawness around his neck was gone, fur grown back thick and glossy. But recovery for a working dog was never just physical. He paused more often now, ears flicking at distant sounds, eyes tracking shadows that weren't threats. The trainers called it normal, temporary, a mind relearning that safety could exist again. Dr. Sarah Whitfield watched from the far side of the room. She had returned as a consultant after the raid, drawn back into canine care despite years of keeping distance. Tall and composed, hair streaked faintly with gray now, Sarah carried herself with the same precision she brought to her work. Loss had shaped her, had taught her that healing was fragile, earned, never rushed. "He's ready," she said quietly, joining Daniel at the glass. "Not perfect, but ready." Daniel nodded. "So am I." The first patrol back was scheduled deliberately, morning shift, familiar streets, no sirens. Daniel adjusted his uniform, feeling its weight settle comfortably again. Kaiser stood beside him, harness secure, posture alert but calm. When Daniel gave the command to load into the cruiser, Kaiser hesitated only a fraction of a second before jumping in, tail brushing the doorframe as it always had. The engine started. The city unfolded around them as they rolled forward, shops opening, joggers along the Riverwalk, delivery trucks double parked where they shouldn't be. Normal life, uninterrupted. Daniel rested one hand on the steering wheel, the other near Kaiser's shoulder. "You good?" he asked softly. Kaiser huffed once, ears forward. They were. At headquarters, changes were already visible. New protocols hung on bulletin boards. Revised K9 protection policies circulated in thick packets. Language sharpened by investigation and public outrage. Forced retirement loopholes closed. Independent oversight added. Accountability written into places it had never been before. The illegal compound in the marsh had been dismantled within days. Fences cut. Buildings condemned. Evidence catalogued. Names traced through shell companies and contracts that no longer hid behind silence. The law had moved slowly, but it had moved. Lena Ortiz stood in the sunlight across the street, clipboard tucked under her arm. She looked lighter somehow, not untouched by what she had seen. Nothing could undo that, but no longer carrying it alone. Her short hair had grown out just enough to soften its severity, and her eyes, though still vigilant, held something new, purpose with direction. The center she had opened sat on the outskirts of the city, a converted warehouse turned sanctuary. No cages, no numbers, just space, care, and time. Retired K9s, washouts, dogs whose service had ended without ceremony, now had a place to land. She watched Daniel and Kaiser walk past, and for the first time, she smiled without restraint. The morning patrol passed quietly, a routine traffic stop, a shoplifting call resolved without escalation. Kaiser tracked once, clean, confident, controlled, and returned on command, eyes bright with focus rather than fear. Daniel felt it then. Not relief, not triumph, gratitude for the work, for the partnership, for the understanding that had been hard-earned. Later, they walked the beach. The tide was low, sand packed firm beneath their boots and paws. The sky reflected on the water in pale streaks, clouds drifting lazily overhead. Daniel loosened Kaiser's lead and let it hang slack between them. They walked side by side, neither rushing, neither looking back. Their footprints formed parallel lines in the wet sand, human and dog, stride and stride, stretching behind them, briefly visible before the water reached in gentle waves and smoothed the surface clean. Daniel stopped once, watching as the last of the prints faded. Kaiser stood beside him, tail brushing his leg, solid and present. "Still here," Daniel murmured. Kaiser leaned into him, steady as ever. They turned back toward the city together. At the end of this story, the lesson is simple, and it is human. Loyalty does not end when the job is done. Love does not disappear when something becomes inconvenient. And responsibility does not vanish just because no one is watching. In our daily lives, we often move forward quickly, forgetting the people and the beings who once stood beside us in our hardest moments. This story reminds us to slow down and look back, to ask ourselves who helped us when we were afraid, when we were tired, when we felt alone. True character is revealed not in success, but in how we protect those who cannot speak for themselves. Just like this K9 and his partner, many of us walk through storms together. Some are seen, some are forgotten. But every act of kindness, every moment of loyalty, leaves a mark deeper than any footprint in the sand. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story reminded you of in your own life. Your words matter more than you think. And if you believe in honoring loyalty, protecting the innocent, and standing up for what is right, we invite you to subscribe to this channel and walk with us through more stories like this. May God bless you, your family, and all those you love. May He protect those who serve, those who suffer in silence, and those who choose compassion, even when it is hard. If this message speaks to you, write Amen in the comments.